Welcome back everybody to the Frostpunk lore series, where in today's episode we'll discuss the Arks scenario. This video will be divided up into two sections, the first being all in-game / developer confirmed information, and the second being my own theories as to where the story and world may go in the future. The brightest minds from Cambridge and Oxford have been chosen to safeguard a priceless treasure, the seeds and seedlings of plants from all over the world. They have been disposed in seedling arks in order to stop them from freezing, but it falls on the engineers of Generator 614 to build a city in order to protect these precious arks until the winter ends. The only way to do this is with automatons, as they will ensure that the green earth is reborn even if the scientists aren't there to witness it. So as the name suggests, this scenario is less about building a city, and it's more about preserving these seedling arks. Unlike other scenarios where automatons aren't required but highly suggested, this time it's a necessity. If/when the Great Freeze ever ends, everything will likely be dead. So this may be the only way to save this frozen world we once called home. As we begin the scenario, we immediately learn our mission is off to a rough start, as the transport carrying factory plans needed to construct the automatons in the first place was lost in a blizzard. So the first thing we need to do, like always, is explore the Frostlands. However, as we send our first scouts out, we learn some chilling news, pun intended. Approaching from the south is a storm, a massive one at that. Because of this, we are put on a timetable to ensure that the arks are up to snuff before the storm hits. Because if the arks drop below a certain temperature, all the seeds and seedlings will die. After exploring the wastes for a bit, we eventually come to the realization that we're pretty much alone up here. We find abandoned camps, dead automatons, and crashed snow crawlers, and not much else. Unlike other cities where there are tons of important locations in terms of lore, here there's not that much. The two most interesting things I found was that some land dreadnoughts were made prior to the Great Freeze and were used for prospecting expeditions before everything froze. These early dreadnoughts were ill-prepared for the winter and froze in place, leaving priceless resources behind. We also find industrial ruins and discover a bounty of resources as our scouts dig through the snow. Sadly, they also discover an avalanche killed everyone who worked there. Examining them, our scouts found that they had relatively light clothes and wore the insignia of Her Majesty's Prospector Corps, suggesting that they were explorers sent north to look for suitable places for generators during the onset of the Great Freeze. Other than that, there's not much else. We eventually arrive at the Lost Dreadnought, and after an hour or so of searching, our scouts find the factory plans, safe and sound, and begin their trek back to the Arks as the weather increasingly becomes worse. But with the factory plans received, our engineers can now construct as many automatons as needed to protect the Arks. Back at the city, we put our engineers to work, and after a short while of constructing multiple automatons, our city becomes fully autonomous. All seedling arks are being safely maintained by these automatons, all critical operations are secured, and the city still has time to spare before the storm hits. And right on cue, an unexpected anomaly occurs. A lone figure appears in the distance. The man makes his way to our city and collapses just as he arrives. Helping the exhausted and frostbitten man into our city, he tells us a horrifying tale. Apparently there's a nearby city called New Manchester. It's inhabited mostly by workers and all their families, but their resources are running out and they're in trouble. Fearing the coming storm, they sent out a scout team to look for help, and this man is the sole survivor. Now here's where the big choice comes into play. Do we help New Manchester or let it die? With this debate, our people become restless. They argue that with the storm closing in, we won't be able to succeed in our mission and help New Manchester at the same time. So the question becomes, do we endanger our mission by helping those people or leave them to die? I personally chose to help New Manchester because during my playthrough, I had already completed the bulk of the tasks required to maintain the Arks. However, were I to assume what the canonical choice would be, I would think they would leave New Manchester to die. This isn't supposed to be a city, it's supposed to basically be an overglorified outpost. The mission is to solely protect all these seeds and seedlings to help the Earth recover after the freeze. Now, one could argue that other countries are likely doing this as well, but they might not be as fortunate as this city is. So when it all comes down to it, I believe New Manchester was left to die. frozen in time by the great storm about to hit because our engineers couldn't abandon their mission. Regardless, for this scenario, let's just assume the engineers and scientists from our city were good guys and wanted to help New Manchester. As we send resources over to the dying city, as well as accept a handful of refugees, our scouts uncover some sad sights. First, we discover a New Manchester camp of dead explorers. This is what remains of the other scouts from the first party. By looking at their supplies, our scouts note that their supplies were completely insufficient for the weather, and the fact that one of their scouts managed to find us is a miracle in its own right. Next, we find a broken vehicle belonging to members of a New Manchester expedition. It was clearly too heavy for the ice it rode on and broke through. Basically, using this thing on the ice was pure suicide. Later, we even find their dreadnought that would have carried hundreds of people, but now it's broken beyond repair with most of its resources unclaimed. But after a while, our scouts eventually reach New Manchester, the dying city. They see a dimly glowing generator that stands in the middle of a shanty town with too many people surrounding it. They all look sick, malnourished, and most don't have a proper roof over their heads. We later learn that the people of New Manchester were even forced to resort to cannibalism in order to survive. Our city's help is truly the only way they can survive. So we send them an automaton full of supplies to somehow help aid in their survival. But as we do this, our people begin to oppose us. They become greatly concerned about sending supplies to a dying city. One engineer even tells us, "We came here to give our lives so that the Earth can be reborn. We can't forfeit it all now. Please show us that you understand the importance of our mission." This, to me, is another telling reason that, canonically, New Manchester was left to die, as the engineers of our city all accepted their fate for the sake of the Earth. But as we continue on and feed and supply New Manchester with coal and other necessities, over time, the crotchety engineer who called us out initially apologizes, saying he's sorry he doubted us and that they'll do whatever it takes to save New Manchester. Which, again, probably didn't happen because, being related to many engineers myself, I know for a fact they don't cave that quickly, nor admit when they are wrong. Regardless, we send New Manchester all the supplies they need and hopefully secure their survival as we make the final push to fulfill our mission before the storm hits. And after one last push, we did it. We don't see what happens when the storm hits. We don't know if our city survives, if the Arks made it, or if the city becomes a ghost town run by automatons. We don't know the ultimate fate of New Manchester. We don't really know anything that happens. All we know is that our engineers tried their hardest to ensure the survival of the Arks. And now, you can only hope for the best. And that is all the relevant lore for this scenario, so let's discuss a few things. I want to start by mentioning the timeline. The storm that we are racing against is the same storm that hit New London in the last episode. So this scenario chronologically takes place roughly around the same time as that one. And if you're curious about the overall chronological order of each scenario, then just look at the playlist for this series, as that's how I've been releasing these episodes. First is the last autumn, then the fall of Winterhome, the refugees, a new home, the Arks, and the last two episodes of this series will be On the Edge and Endless. Anyway, the main thing I did want to talk about is just how underprepared New Manchester was. Their dreadnought was most likely understocked in supplies, their snow crawlers were too heavy, their clothes were not made to withstand the weather, and it seemed like workers solely occupied the city with little to no engineers. This to me could mean two things. First, this was supposed to be a dead generator. Basically, the IEC was told to load up a bunch of poor people and laborers and ship them off to a generator where they could all die off away from the lords and the wealthy. Essentially, the lords wanted to get rid of all the undesirables, so they gave them shoddy equipment and little to no supplies, promising them safety when in reality, they wanted them all to go out there and die, so the lords could reclaim the generator for themselves at a later date. This does make sense somewhat, but also why wouldn't the lords just leave those people to die back in Manchester and take the generator right now, or use them as slave labor to build their shitty city? It just seems strange to me how badly New Manchester became, because as far as I can tell, it wasn't due to a faulty generator. It's described as a dimly glowing generator, which tells me it doesn't have enough coal. It's not malfunctioning like Winterhome was, and again, as far as I can tell, it seems like a totally functioning, albeit underpowered generator. But everything else around it suffers from ill-preparedness. Too many people were sent here with next to no supplies, and because of that, it makes me think of another possibility. What if some generators are experiments? Now, maybe it's because I've been replaying Fallout recently, but what if, like the vaults from Fallout, some generators were designed as experiments? For example, Generator 157. The IEC intentionally sabotaged the generator's construction process so that it would malfunction a few months into the freeze. Generator 014, forcing the lords and the common folk to cohabitate after coercing the common folk to steal the lord's dreadnought. eventually resulting in a big confrontation once both parties inevitably reach the generator. And Generator 614, a city designed with one goal in mind: to protect seeds and seedlings from the freeze. But unbeknownst to them, it's a morality test, as nearby another generator would be placed with next to no supplies, yet be horrendously overpopulated, ensuring that the people of said generator could not survive on their own and could only do so with the help of 614. While yes, some of these experiments don't perfectly line up, some, like this whole Generator 614 conspiracy I'm cooking up, makes kind of a lot of sense. Again, why would New Manchester be neglected so badly like this? Why would an overpopulated generator with next to no supplies be placed next to one of the most important generators in the world? It just feels like a big experiment, a big morality test. And at the end of the day, I believe they failed that test. The people of Generator 614 likely left New Manchester to die, focusing entirely on their mission that they likely succeeded in. But after the Great Storm passes, I imagine all that remains of Generator 614 are the automatons, endlessly toiling away, day in and day out, ensuring that the Earth will be reborn, while their creators are nothing more than frozen statues.